Good day, and thank you for the opportunity to address this important topic and to invite participants into a new international neurojustice consortium, currently co-led by Dr. Williams and I. I am a clinical neuropsychologist, and I lead a multidisciplinary medical and rehabilitation team for complex injuries and brain injuries. I also oversee a related rehabilitation, resource development, and research firm. The social enterprise aspect of the firm focuses exclusively on the Indigenous community and provision of related services and resources. After a review of the literature, I shall describe some of our activities and then introduce the Neurojustice Consortium, which I will be invited you all to join. The social enterprise aspect of our clinic focuses exclusively on services and resources for Indigenous community within Canada, in Toronto in particular. After a review of the literature, I shall describe some of our activities and programs, and then introduce the Neurojustice Consortium. So in terms of the global neurojustice literature, I will do an overview at this point. The criminal justice system worldwide demonstrates an overrepresentation of those with congenital and acquired cognitive conditions across the globe. Near universally, the largest contingent of those overrepresentations reflect Indigenous persons, Indigenous heritage. The literature also clearly demonstrates the influence of alcohol and substances, in the sense that criminal acts largely stem from the direct influence of alcohol and/or substance use at the time of the index offense. And certainly in terms of our own experience in working with Indigenous people within the correctional justice system, we find this to be almost universally true. Addictions and trauma-related self-medication contribute as well as a common part of Indigenous post-colonial experience. Early indicators of cognitive impairments are often recognized in school-age children under a variety of labels, including intellectual disabilities, including borderline intelligence, learning disabilities, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, as well as parallel substance and nutrition-related gestational disorders. Acquired traumatic brain injuries, including sports and altercation-related concussive disorders, are also part of this mix. Less recognized factors include neurotoxic water and airborne pre as well as post-birth exposure, including, but not limited to, resource extraction runoffs, industrial runoffs, pesticides, and home product off-gassing, including furniture and carpet-related off-gassing. To add to this, viruses such as Zika and West Nile also can contribute to neurocognitive and behavioral disorders, as does congenital heart disease and type 1 diabetes. In an important study, an overview by David Bellinger from Harvard Medical School, who studied the related contributions of these assorted etiologies of neurocognitive behavioral disorders, as well as looking at environmental chemicals and other related risk factors. Dr. Bellinger and group confirmed or identified that environmental related chemicals play a very substantive role, on par with some of the other more problematic disorders. In terms of care, education, and justice impacts, Certainly children who are faced with these disorders often don't get the care they need, contributing to an intergenerational pattern of educational, functional, and economic dependency. Justice system involved individuals often face complicating procedural complexities, such as a limited understanding of their civil rights, legal terms and processes, as well as difficulties cooperating with their attorney, difficulties processing and recalling the detailed information required in court proceedings and the lead up to court proceedings, as well as a vulnerability to sacrificing oneself to defend others. In other words, being more vulnerable, being potentially gullible to the persuasion of other people, to perhaps suggest that themselves is the guilty party rather than someone else being the guilty party. The criminogenic factors driving Indigenous justice system over-representation are well summarized in a recent volume titled Victims of Crime Research Digest 3, Aboriginal Victimization in Canada, a summary of the literature. 40% of Indigenous Canadians self-reported as victims of crime in the year leading up to the prior year of the survey, identified that 40% versus 20% of non-Indigenous Canadians were victims. In terms of violent crime, Indigenous folks reported 300% more likely victimization versus non-Indigenous people. Demographic and social factors and elevated risks of offending and or victimization. In terms of the worldwide literature, these factors include being young, living in a lone parent family situation, living common law, having higher levels of unemployment, and consumption of alcohol. In fact, each and every one of these factors are highly indicated within the Indigenous population in Canada. So, for instance, in relation to non-Indigenous Canadians, Indigenous Canadians have a mean age of 27 versus 40. 48% are currently under the age of 25. In terms of family composition, Indigenous-led female-headed households reflected 86% of that cohort, at least back in 2001, reflecting the latest census data available. In terms of educational achievement, while there have been gains in terms of the Indigenous community, the community still lags 62% versus 81% in terms of having at least a high school diploma. In relation to unemployment, the unemployment rate, at least as of 2008, was 15% for the Indigenous community, compared to 6% for the non-Indigenous. In terms of annual income, 33% less annual income compared to the greater Canadian population. With respect to alcohol and drugs in victim-related crimes, there was equivalency here. 60% for both Indigenous and non-Indigenous victims of crime. However, this statistic does not break down relative to crimes that may be more violent in nature. The literature is quite consistent with their own community partners, in the sense that it certainly supports the direction that we are moving towards. That is a Indigenous, culturally focused healing, mental health, and prevention strategy to directly address alcohol and substance abuse and dependence as core program aspects. Also important to note is a unique contribution in terms of the Canadian medical legal status, in the sense that the Supreme Court of Canada, through a court case involving a young woman named Gladue, who was of Indigenous background, through this court case, I won't describe the details currently, however, what was recognized going up to the Supreme Court of Canada is that to end the revolving door of recidivism, judges must lean towards healing and rehabilitative sentences, but consider and balance community safety when sentencing Indigenous offenders to address prison overrepresentation, which the Supreme Court of Canada described as a crisis. So fetal alcohol syndrome disorder may be considered to be a sub-entity relative to the Gladue decision and requirements. In that context, the Aboriginal Legal Services of Toronto and Anishinaabe Health of Toronto, as well as our own services, provide FASD-related Gladue pre-sentencing, multidisciplinary diagnostic, and healing assessments to assist judges in making those sentencing decisions. This is currently a pilot model comprised of assessments by a medical physician, my own team as a neuropsychological assessment team, a social work evaluation to help, as in all Gladue cases, discern the extent to which the individual's life and life history is commensurate with that of multi-generational trauma and post-colonial effects. In the FASD case, the social worker also helps by addressing or interviewing individuals who were around at the time of the pregnancy of the individual that we're assessing to better ascertain the likelihood of alcohol exposure during that pregnancy. Finally, and of utmost importance, is the traditional healer, who helps to identify the degree to which the individual is and does view part of their healing as being through reconnection with culture. In this context, and in the broader context, our community partners and our services have called for the development of an ecosystem, if you like. An ecosystem reflecting a coordinated, systematic set of services pertaining to FASD and brain disorder assessment and rehabilitation. We have already commenced a pilot project which remains ongoing, and we've now put in addressed a request for proposals in regards to providing expansion and permanency of these services. These include a clinically and vocationally integrated mental health and addictions program of care, a clinical in-home family wraparound model utilizing occupational therapy to address the social determinants of health as key elements, as well as an FASD and brain disorder clinical, teaching, and research hub. There would also be a link to the Gladue FASD protocol that I've just described, as well a linkage to the Ontario Attorney General's Office funded pilot project occurring currently with Aboriginal Legal Services and again with our own services. In addition, we have a pilot project proposed to evaluate an online cognitive screening protocol to serve as an assessment triage tool for elementary students and inmates to provide an early indicator of potential cognitive impairments, which would require further assessment by way of psychoeducational assessment in the elementary system, or for inmates to identify those that should have more extensive neuropsychological assessment because of suspected cognitive disorders. It is the intention that this systematic, synergistic ecosystem, the benefits would include guidance for FASD and other brain disorder supports in terms of addictions and mental health policy, housing, community, family, education, justice, and work-related interventions. In our work with the FASD GLADU project, we've identified what we know to be requirements in terms of intervention and rehabilitation. However, time and time again, those services within the community, whether they be housing, whether they be addictions related, are not sufficiently knowledgeable of or specialized in FASD and brain disorders in order to promote maximal recovery, rehabilitation, and healing. I will now turn to the proposed international consortium and the activities that we anticipate. Once again, I'm inviting this distinguished audience from across the globe to please consider joining our consortium, which is just now being formed. The activities that we're currently anticipating, and of course, as we gain more membership and further inputs, certainly this list could be added to. But at minimum, we anticipate a regular webinar, which would have a roundtable format, reviewing country-specific issues, strategies, and programs to help cross-pollinate ideas across different jurisdictions. Additionally, peer-review open source or traditional journal would ideally be forthcoming as a freestanding journal over time, but in the interim, ideally we'd be looking towards special issues from existing journals. There would be a semi or annual conference as well to disseminate related information. In addition, there would be an effort to establish low resource cost intervention strategies and best practice methodologies to address cognitive behavioral disorders and their impacts in the school system in terms of independent living and work. The low resources specifically speak to the fact that there's highest overrepresentation within Indigenous communities, which tend to have access to less resources overall. So this is a call to be most efficient with our anticipated intervention strategies. We're also looking to establish a common research outcomes database and sharing and co-development of clinical and legal tools and resources. Two examples that we are putting forth for the group's consideration, including the functionally oriented ROMS, Rehab Outcome Measurement System outcome database, with the objective to further indigenize its content. BrainScreen is an existing online cognitive assessment platform, which requires further normative data relative to the early elementary school group to be most effective as a triage or screening tool as early as possible within the school trajectory. All of the tools and resources that we're speaking of be very important that they include Indigenous methodologies, and this will be part of the mandate towards knowledge transfer and possibly a parallel to a common metrics approach. From the standpoint of medical legal strategizing, these would include parliamentary influence
and I note that Dr. Williams has made great strides in this respect and will be leading the group in this way. The potential for class action lawsuits against the state with respect to neurocognitive and neurobehavioral disorders and injuries in the post-colonial context. These may be parallel to the impetus behind the inception of the Canadian Truth and Reconciliation process. Additionally, obviously, there are, in the context of neurotoxins, there are industrial and resource extraction implications, pesticide implications, which again may be suited to considered class action lawsuits. To give you a bit more details on two of the potential universal measures that could be brought to the group. From the cognitive screening standpoint, this includes BrainScreen, which is an easily accessible, web-based automated screen for cognitive impairment with real-time interpretive results that persons of various age, education, racial, linguistic, and ethnic backgrounds can complete independently. The measures within this online brief battery include orientation, working memory, learning, memory and retrieval, sustained selective attention and accuracy, visual spatial skills, problem solving, reaction time, information processing speed. To date, BrainScreen has been normed on 3,878 individuals ranging in age from 10 to 84. Currently under funding review to validate BrainScreen as a screening tool towards identification of cognitive disabilities in educational and correctional facilities. We hope to hear soon about this funding so we can move the project ahead. It basically seeks to assess the sensitivity, specificity, positive and negative predictive validity related to disorders such as intellectual disabilities, learning disabilities, FASD, and acquired brain injuries, to name but a few. With respect to outcome measurement, the Rehabilitation Outcome Measurement System, which myself and colleagues have developed within Rehabilitation Research, Education, Evaluation Services, is an open source online database housed in the University of Toronto Scarborough's Mental Health and Psychology Department, a major neuropsychological training facility. It provides universal clinical, functional, vocational protocols for any combination of disabling conditions stemming from one or a combination of physical, cognitive, and/or psychological impairments. The potential administrative base for the Neurojustice Consortium is currently envisioned to be a partnership of University of Exeter under Dr. Williams and University of Toronto Scarborough Mental Health Psychology Department and Rehabilitation Sciences Institute at the University of Toronto. Finally, my own firm, Rehabilitation Research, Education, and Evaluation Services, would also be a partner in the core administrative hub. As this video winds down, the next several slides will depict the Canadian Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls for action, which are most pertinent to this issue of neurojustice. In closing, before the TRC calls scroll, Once again, I am inviting the audience, participants, all of whom are clinical, but hopefully to be joined by the legal profession towards a neurojustice consortium so that we can all strategize and address this issue of overrepresentation in the judicial system relative to those with a wide variety of neurocognitive and behavioral conditions. Thank you for your time.